Hey there friend, and welcome to another video on Go. In this video we'll talk about two major topics. One of them is arrays and the other one is slices. Now let's talk about why we need arrays in the first place. Imagine that you're working with some primitives, you're working with integers, you're working with booleans, you're working with strings, and you feel somehow that in your code suddenly you have a need to group things. So imagine that you're suddenly dealing with a bunch of orders or many rows in a file. My point is, you will encounter a situation where you feel like you're repeating yourself. You have many variables that are very similar and it feels like, well, they all belong to the same problem domain. Let me give you some examples here. So for example, with cities, if you have three variables that says city 1, city 2, city 3, you should probably have an array called cities. Or if you got a bunch of IDs and you feel like you're naming them ID1, ID2, ID3, this is a slightly different construct here, but it's still an array because it contains many values under the same name. So once we've established the motivations why we want arrays, let's have a look at different types of arrays. Now you could either be declaring an array like so. This means that we give it a capacity of 3 and we say that it's of type int, but we haven't assigned any values to it yet. What we can do to assign it a value is to use this assignment operator in which we're creating the variable while assigning it a value here on the right side of things. What we're saying here is to have capacity 5, type string, and 2 values. Out of 5 should be New York and LA. However, what we're saying is because we have a capacity of 5, we're leaving it open so it has 3 more slots in where we could be assigning information. Now let's look at the other example. In this case, we are using ... for capacity, which means we are inferring the size of our array based on how many items we're writing here. So ... just means we will tell you how many items, and in this case we have 4 different items, which means the capacity of this array would be 4. And just like this one with string as a type, this time we have integer as a type. Now let's talk about some common operations, because you want to interact with this array, right? You want to say what's the value on this position. Println, we want to print a specific item. Now by writing like so, we are 0-based index, which means 0 is the first position and length -1 is the last position. What we're saying here is that we want the first value, which in our case is New York or NY. If we wanted LA instead, we would have to progress 1 step in our index, and we could also be writing this slightly different, namely we would use the length function on cities, but remember now that the last index is the length -1, so this would also return LA. Right, so now we know how to actually create arrays. We also know how to read specific values in the array. Now that we looked at the various ways of creating our arrays, either with a certain capacity and only filling it partly, or creating it with full capacity like we do here, we want to look at another thing, which is iteration. Iteration means that we go through every single item from start to finish, or we could also customize the loop to go through every other item, for example. Point is, we are starting to look at some point in the array and then we finish looking at a later point in time. There are a couple of ways to do the iteration itself. First off, let's look at a for loop. What we do with a for loop is to create this I variable representing the index, and we are incrementing this index and we stop at the very last position in the array. The other way of doing things is to use a so-called range call. Now the range call will do 2 things for us. One is to get the actual value, but also the key. And what does that mean for an array? Keys in a list or in an array is actually the index, but had we done this for a dictionary, for example, the key would have been a key and the value would have been a value. So it's just a matter of knowing what happens when. So having a look here at the below terminal output from this program, we can see that in the first case, when we use the for loop, we see how we first get NY for New York and then LA for Los Angeles. Using the range, however, we can see that when it outputs the key and value, we get a very interesting output. Remember how what we're listing through is cities? and we have only assigned 2 values out of 5. What you're getting first here is key, value, but looking at these 3, they look seemingly empty, and the reason that they are empty is that we created a capacity for 5. So indeed the value is empty, but the value is empty, but the key is still there, and it's waiting for us to assign a value to it. Next up, let's see how we could change what is in the array, either to add items or remove items. In our final part, let's talk about slices, and we're gonna talk about slices in the context of making an array expandable, meaning that we can either add items to it or remove items to it. But to build up that conceptual knowledge, we need to start with a concept called slices. Now, slices are a part of an array, and the way to create a slice is by using the slice operator here, or the colon. So here we've taken an array, we've taken cities that has 2 items in it and a capacity of 5, and we're using this colon here to denote. So think about the slice operator as a scissor. So in this scissor, what we're saying is we will first cut in the first index, and then we were going to cut just before this index. Meaning that if we do a cut like this with 0 as you know, where we start cutting, and 1 where we stop cutting, we're going to end up having this item, New York. However, if we move the scissors slightly to the right, what we're saying is, well, we don't want New York, but we want LA. So in this case, we're going to get LA only. Looking at the printout here, we see exactly that as we have run this program. So that's great, right? We know how to get a part of an array, but how does that work conceptually to help us add whatever we need? That is really the good question to ask yourself. And I would like to introduce a couple of things here. There are 2 utility functions that you should know about when you work with slices. One of them is called make. Make has the ability to create a slice either from an existing array or from nothing. And the append function is what allows you to modify a slice and add things to it. You saw here how we were using the colon or the slice operator to create these slices, but we could have used the make instead. So what we're doing here is to give it, so what we need to specify for make is 1, the type. So here we're saying an array of something called product. And product, if we go up a little bit, is a struct with fields ID and name. But going back here, we could easily have typed int instead of product, in which case it would have been a slice of type int. But now we're saying it's of type product, and we're also saying that capacity is 0. So we're dealing with an empty slice, and we have used the make function to create that empty slice. And next thing we do is to create an entry of type product. So here we instantiate a struct instance, and yeah, we are looping through all of this. So we're looping through our products, and then we're using the append function to, first off, you can see how we take a slice in, and then we are taking as the second argument the new element that we want to input into it. What we're getting is a slice that has gone from 0 elements, because we see here on before that is completely empty, to one containing at least 1. So yeah, in that respect, if we work with slices instead of arrays, conceptually, what we can do with a slice is add items to it, but also remove items from it. And we could be creating another product, for example, here, and call that one product 2, and we call it D, and then we add another looping construct like so, just so you can see how things keep on growing. And here you see how we again take our products slice, but we add another product to it, and we suddenly end up with a slice that now has 2 items in it. So this is really a way for us to work with a data structure like an array, turn that into a slice, use append method to add things to it.